I want to start with a story, and I'm going to end with my favorite question. But what I'm going to try to communicate to you is a few lessons about asking questions, because asking a good question is really about sort of executing the act of curiosity. Curiosity begins with a thought, and then typically what follows is a question, and then ultimately what follows from that is a lot of learning, and that's really what curiosity is all about. When I was 16 years old, I was in high school in New Jersey, and I was working on a project, my final culminating project for this class that I was taking, which was a combination U.S. history and American literature class, I was working on a project about the experiences of Vietnam veterans and their experiences in the war. And I had been reading this book called Bloods, which was a collection of oral histories of African American soldiers during the war. And the whole thing was just gripping to me. I could not believe what these experiences were like. And I'd been reading Tim O'Brien and other writers who wrote about the Vietnam era. But these actual experiences were just like cut right through me. And there were interviews with people, and they were describing their experiences, Green Berets who were describing their experiences of collecting trophies from their victims that they killed. And I couldn't believe it. So I wanted to interview soldiers, people who had served during the war, as part of my project. So this is obviously, like, I'm 16 years old. I'm like, I know how to do this. I'll just go ask people questions. Everybody does that, right? So I'm on a train from Princeton Junction, New Jersey, going up to Newark to meet a friend of my father's who is running a homeless shelter, who's a former Green Beret. And he's probably like a 6'3" African-American male, and I'm like this little skinny kid, like even skinnier than I am now, from the suburbs at this independent school in New Jersey, and I'm like, I'm gonna go ask him questions about his life, and what was that like when you were a Green Beret in Vietnam? But here's the thing, in the end, I did. He met me at Penn Station in Newark. He took me to the homeless shelter where he works, and we had an amazing conversation that really fueled that project. And so the first thing I want you to understand about asking questions is that don't be afraid. You can ask questions. The real lesson in that I learned, and I've learned again and again and again, is that often people want to talk about the experiences that have shaped them, even if those experiences are painful. There's another lesson, and it starts with this guy. That's Studs Terkel. How many of you know Studs Terkel? Can I see a show of hands? Not too many of you. Oldsters, the old Tedsters know Studs Terkel. Studs Terkel was probably the greatest living interviewer on the planet, as far as I'm concerned, but certainly in America. When he was living, he died in 2008. I was fortunate enough to interview him once. He was deaf as a doornail. I had to like shout into the microphone for him to hear me. But he was born in 1912, died in 2008, so 96 years old when he died, had interviewed probably, thousands upon thousands of people. His seminal work, or work that really set him apart, which was also the first work that I discovered by him, was a book called Working. People talk about what they do all day and how they feel about what they do. And it was that thing, not just like, what do you do all day, but how do you feel about what you do? Because all of us work, 8, 9, 10 hours a day, 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week, and how we feel about how we spend that time is actually really important. And Terkel, this book is 400, 500 pages long. Have some of you read it, I'm guessing, or read in it? You've looked at it, and it's amazing, right? One of the little games that I play with that book is trying to figure out what questions he asked to elicit the kinds of responses he got. And he was talking with priests and prostitutes. He was talking with cab drivers and CEOs, postal workers, garbage delivery men, radio DJs. Everybody is in that book, is represented in that book. It was published in 1973, but it's outstanding reading. It really is. And he has this sense of curiosity about people and their experiences that is uncommon, and it comes through, even though his words are nowhere in the book, it comes through because he kept asking people about their lives. So the second sort of point in all of this, where am I pointing this thing? There we go, is to be curious. Be curious about the world. Don't just let it be out there and not wonder about it, but be truly curious about other people's experiences, about why things are the way they are. This thing is dying, I think, but anyway, maybe every time I go like this, they'll move it. No, there we go. So, next lesson. This guy is not Studs Terkel. It's State Senator Tim Grendell. He's now a judge in Geauga County, but when I met him, he was a state senator. Actually, the first time I met him, he was running for Attorney General. But several years ago, I think this would have been around 2008 or so, there was this thing happening, that the Great Lakes Water Compact. This gets back to why policy matters if Amy Hanauer is still here. But the Great Lakes Water Compact was this agreement between all of the Great Lakes states and 2 Canadian provinces. The Canadian government and the US government, and everybody was going to agree that certain uses of the Great Lakes, of the fresh water, 1/5 of the world's fresh water, which is at our doorstep, would be protected. And just about every legislature on the US side had agreed to it except for Ohio's, and the provincial legislatures had also agreed to it on the Canadian side. Everybody was poised to do it except State Senator Tim Grendell was worried about the water rights of private property owners who lived inside the watershed. So I was interviewing him along with Matt Dolan, who was then a state rep from Geauga County and a champion of the compact. And back and forth, live on the air for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. We're getting close to the end of the program. And finally I say, State Senator Grendell, is there any language that we could put inside the legislation to authorize the compact that would set your mind at ease? It's a really obvious question, right? Is there any compromise here, any middle ground? And he said, well, yeah, I think there is. Nobody had asked that question yet. For some reason, like it hadn't come up. I don't know if he was waiting for enough press or something like that. But sometimes, the point of that is that sometimes the obvious question is the most important question to ask. So don't be afraid to ask the obvious question, because it may turn out that the obvious question needs to be asked at that moment. This is my friend Noelle Celeste. Any of you know Noelle Celeste? Can we get a show of hands? Fans of Noelle Celeste? I'm a big fan of Noelle Celeste. She and I have done a lot of work together. And one of the other areas in which you wind up sometimes asking questions isn't always the interview, but sometimes you're facilitating a conversation. Teachers know this really well. And in fact, most of what I learned about asking questions, I learned when I was teaching high school. But one of the things that Noelle taught me one day when we were planning out this group facilitation thing that we were working on, and she said to me, I got to stop touching that, and she said, we were trying to figure out how to get a group of people to talk to one another about the things that matter to them most. And we wanted to feed them a question that they would ask one another. And I was like, well, you just say, like, hey, what do you care about? No, it doesn't really matter. What do you spend your time doing? And she hit on it. So what's your passion? And that was the thing that cracked it wide open. And ultimately, the event was this 2.5-hour event. Everybody was talking with one another, strangers who had never met, because we gave them the right question to use. What's your passion? And they talked to each other about their passions, about what was deep inside their heart, what they cared most about. And so the lesson there that she has taught me, and she continues to teach me every time we work together, is that words matter. This thing won't work. There it is. Words matter. The words you use matter a lot when you ask questions, because they do. Words matter. This is Ishmael Bea. He wrote a book called Long Way Gone. He was a child soldier in Sierra Leone. I interviewed him once. And it was sort of terrifying to interview him. The anxiety I experienced before interviewing a former child soldier and published author, knowing that what I wanted to ask him about, that anxiety that I felt prior to that interview was akin to the anxiety I felt waiting back there. But I had to ask him during a live interview on the radio, in your book, you talk about killing people. Can you tell us what that was like for you and how you live with that and those memories? And it was so hard to do that. But I knew that it was the question that needed to be asked. And I knew it was the question, ultimately, it was the stuff of his life, the life-shaping things that happened to him, that I knew that he probably did want to actually talk about. And what I was trying to do in that moment was find whatever capacity I had for empathy for someone who had been through those experiences. Not really, I mean, in that case, empathy is really hard, but what you have to do when you're interviewing anybody or when you're just asking questions of anybody is you really have to strive for empathy. I'm gonna throw this down. Ugh. No PowerPoint next time. Amy Hanauer was right. Okay, so strive for empathy. And you have to do that because oftentimes the best conversations that you're having and the moments where your curiosity is really sated is when you're speaking with somebody who has a completely different experience from your own. And when you strive for empathy, you're striving to reach across that difference and put yourself in that person's shoes and really open your heart to their experience. Who knows who this is? It's all the oldsters again. Allen Ginsberg was a hero of mine. I'm supposed to stay on the red because that's where the good light is. Allen Ginsberg was a hero of mine, beat poet, and I had an opportunity to interview him many, many years ago. When I was in college, I was writing my thesis about his poetry, and I somehow got an opportunity to interview him. And the night before the interview, my friend Jeff and I met him at this event, and we said, "Sir, we're both big fans of yours. We're both at Berkeley. We're both writing our theses, our undergraduate thesis on your poetry. Could we possibly interview you tonight?" And he said, "No." I said, "What about tomorrow?" And he said, "Sure. As long as you can give me a ride from Palo Alto to San Francisco." Okay, sure, I did it. So, long story, but what he said at that moment, he said, "Pick me up tomorrow morning at 9 at the hotel over there," or whatever it was, "and make sure you don't ask me a question that anybody has asked me before." It's like, okay. And the dude had been interviewed a lot of times. I mean, there are books upon books upon books and magazine articles and everything, Paris Review, New Yorker, everywhere, right? So Jeff and I, we're like up all night, reviewing everything that we've researched about him to make sure that we're not going over old ground. It was a really, really important lesson, and in the end, we did. I mean, we were asking him about stuff that really was new for him. And it worked really well. This is Merle Johnson. Many of you have heard her before if you've ever listened to a City Club broadcast, because she asks a question at almost, I would say 80% of the Friday forums that we host that are broadcast. And this is a picture of her asking a question just last month, January 9th, when Tim McGinty, our county prosecutor, was speaking. And I can't recite the entire question that she asked because it was so perfect. She recited all of the facts about the Tamir Rice death and Timothy Lohman, the patrolman who shot Tamir Rice. And she recited the facts dispassionately and completely factually, and then she said, in a very pointed way, "Will Officer Lohman be indicted?" And Prosecutor McGinty spent, a good 5 or 6 minutes going over a rehearsed answer that he had. But the point is that her question, she had marshaled all of the facts together for that question. And so, like the lesson with Ginsberg, the lesson with Merle Johnson is to be informed. Don't ask questions of people, especially this is in the case when you're interviewing celebrity-type people or big people who have spoken about things. Don't ask them questions that they've already answered elsewhere. Know your subject to the extent that you can. Now, I know a lot of you know who this is. Stuart Scott died in November. He was an amazing, amazing sportscaster, broadcaster for ESPN. And in this moment, this is a still that I grabbed off of a YouTube video. This guy on the right, on your right, yeah, it's my right, it's your right, it's over there. And anyway, the guy on the right is interviewing. He's one of these red carpet interviews as Stuart Scott is walking down. And he's like, hey, can I get your attention? And Stuart Scott comes over, very generous with his time. And this guy takes about a minute to ask him. He's like, hey, so I was just wondering, Stuart Scott, great, great, amazing career. And I was wondering if you have any advice for young, upcoming reporters like myself. And also, how'd you get where you are? And then he stopped. And Stuart Scott said, right there, you just asked me 2 questions. Ask one. Don't ask 2 questions. And he said, and then he went on, he said, and be simple. You don't have to use a lot of words to show people how much you know. Just ask a simple question. Sometimes the best question is why. The simplest question there is. And he's right. You don't have to use these long questions with all sorts of things to show how much you know. Sometimes the most important thing is to just be as simple as you can be, which is that one, number 7. So, to review for one moment, if I may. So number 7 is be simple. I should start at the beginning. Number 1 was be unafraid. 2, be curious. 3, do you remember what number 3 was? Oh, come on. Come on. What? Go. No. Yes, try the obvious question. And then number 4 was words matter. Number 5, strive for empathy. Number 6, be informed. Number 7, be simple. And then I said that I was going to share with you my favorite question. My favorite question, which ultimately was really the question that I asked Ishmael Bea, is what's that like for you? Or what was that like for you? And that comes from, that's not like the snarky question like, hey, how's that going for you? It's the authentic, sincere question. What's that like for you? Because I don't know, I didn't experience it. And I think that's a very important question, a question we should ask one another quite a lot. There's one last thing, though, to say, and that when you are asking questions of somebody, it's a gift. Their answer is a gift. And when they're giving that gift of you, to you, of your experience and their experience and their time, it's very important to be gracious. All of you have given so much to all of us today, your time and your attention, and I hear outside in the lobby your questions as well. So I want to just say to all of you, thank you very much.